This is AUGforums.com Real Talk, an unfiltered and independent perspective on Acumatica Cloud ERP. First, thank you to our sponsors, Repay, DataSelf, and Velixo. Please take a minute to support this podcast by clicking each one of the sponsor banners located at augforums.com/sponsors. Our sponsors track clicks, and every click helps to support this podcast. My name is Tim Rodman, and I want to mention two more things in this pre-recorded intro before we get started. First, I'm always looking for victims, guests, on the podcast. If you use Acumatica in any capacity, no matter how small, I'd love to talk with you. Check out augforums.com/podcast and click the link near the top of the page to learn about being a guest on the podcast. Second, I'd love to see you listed on my Rolodex. Check out the instructions at augforums.com/Rolodex to see how you can add yourself to the list. All right, that's it for the pre-recorded intro. Let's get started. Today is Thursday, September 23rd, 2021, and this is episode number 49, My Highlights from Acumatica 2021 R2. First, I'd like to talk about the virtual launch event that took place yesterday, and then we'll get into some details about Acumatica 2021 R2. Don't think it was live, it was recorded. I think the whole thing was recorded, but it was broadcast or /recorded from Phoenix, Arizona, or more specifically Scottsdale, Arizona, from a place called Sneaky Big Studios, SNEAKY Big. You could look it up. And it's a sister company of an Acumatica customer called PXG. And it's pretty interesting. I've actually been there before to PXG, and I got a tour of the campus. And I call it a campus, but it's a street right next to the Scottsdale Airport. Really nice area. And you would think that all the buildings are just separate office buildings, but they're all related companies. And you've got like PXG Golf, then you've got Sneaky Big Studios in another office building. You got a Harley Davidson dealership. There's even some retail space. And it's actually all owned by a group of companies called YAM Holdings. You can look them up at YAMWW.com. They hold a bunch of different companies, including that Harley Davidson dealership. And it's all, I don't know if it's still privately held, but it's still primarily influenced, at least, by a guy named Bob Parsons. He's a billionaire, and he's the founder of GoDaddy. So he's still into all these different businesses, and it seems like he's into businesses that do things that he enjoys, like riding Harley Davidsons, golfing, and even the PXG company name stands for Parsons Extreme Golf. Parsons being his last name. So it's a pretty cool place, and I got to go there probably a couple years ago at this point, and it's interesting company, interesting group of companies. So Acumatica somehow leveraged that relationship. I don't know if they got a discount or if they just like cozying up to a sister company of one of their customers, but they broadcast from Sneaky Big Studios. And when the camera first panned into John Roskell, boy, I thought it was a real place. It was really well done. And I thought that because the last two of these that they've done, they did from different museums, like an airplane museum and a car museum, really nice facilities. And they worked tours of the museum into the last two events. for 2021 R1 and 2020 R2. So I just assumed it was another one of those places. But we learned at the end that it's actually just a big, giant green screen. And it's not just a green screen, but they do some pretty sophisticated 3D modeling that includes wireframes and even the lighting inside the what is really a virtual environment, and really well done. I had no idea at the beginning, so it was pretty impressive. And I kind of doubt they got a discount. Maybe they did, but either way, it was well done. And I don't know. My hunch is it cost Acumatica to put this thing on. So it's going to be interesting to see how Acumatica continues to go with their events. It's just going to be this bigger, better trend that we've been seeing. Acumatica continues to go with their events. It's just going to be this bigger, better trend that we've been seeing. I personally would rather see more demos, but I get that the more you're becoming a official major player in the ERP space, I guess maybe you're expected to put on events like this. But it was pretty cool. It was pretty well done. So we got some slides and some pep talk from John Roskell. Then Ajoy jumped in, gave some highlights, and then we got into demos right around the 14-minute mark. And I'm not 100% sure on this, but it seemed like the first round of demos were overview of things that we've seen previously. Although there was one thing that jumped out at me when they showed the integration with Microsoft Teams. I hadn't noticed before that there's a button now inside of Teams that allows you to pull up Acumatica records from Teams. New feature, not sure. But that first round seemed to be things that we'd seen already. On that Teams integration, I myself am not a big chat fan. It's counterproductive for me. So, not that exciting to me personally, but I could see how a lot of people are using Teams and it's important to them. So after that first round of demos, that was from Doug Johnson and Jessica Gadbois, I think is how you say her last name. Sorry, Jessica. They're the go-to demo people, and they were also sitting at a desk that looked like a sports show, but the background didn't look like a sports show, but that kind of a desk, kind of arc desk, and I wonder what their screen looked like. I assume it was just a desk and that was it. Everything else around them was, I think, virtual. So after their first round of demos, you then had Sean from Acumatica sit down with PXG and interview a couple people from PXG. So PXG is the sister company of Sneaky Big Studios, and it sounds like they used to be using kits. They're now about to implement Acumatica manufacturing, so that's interesting. I know another thing they were interested in when I was out there a couple of years ago was the multiple base currencies. So they didn't mention that, but I'm sure that that's on their radar as well. Okay, so then we went back to round 2 of the demos, and here's where we were definitely seeing 2021 R2 features. Now, it's important to point out that there's a difference in focus between what gets released in R1 and R2. You're seeing features across the board in both releases, but in general, you're going to find, at least I found, more platform stuff in R1 releases. And in R2 releases, there tends to be less platform focus and more focus across the various industry editions. That seems to be the trend. So first thing we saw was multiple base currencies. Now I think this is pretty significant, especially as Acumatica is rapidly moving into more and more international markets. They're really pushing their presence in the UK right now. Of course, they have already had a worldwide presence, but they really seem to be accelerating even more internationally. So there's multiple base currencies where you've got companies in different countries with different base currencies is a feature that I think has been long awaited. Prior to that, you had to set up separate tenants, which were completely separate environments. Now you can be in the same tenant, and have multiple companies in that tenant, with each company using different base currencies, including it looked like the ARM financial report writer could handle reporting across those different base currencies. So you could do like a side-by-side P&L with two different companies with two different currencies going on, and then I assume do some translation to a common currency. Maybe have two different columns so you could still see the base currency, something like that. So pretty cool, looked nice, although I might have missed it, but they didn't really give the disclaimer. So I pulled up my 2021 R2 demo environment, which is on the first release, the first build. So it could just be a first build thing. But I went to go enable the multiple base build thing. But I went to go enable the multiple base currencies feature on the enable disable feature screen. And you get an error. And the error message says that you can't enable it. You have to disable all of the following features first: contract management, time management, projects. That's a big one. So this does not work with projects. Customer portal, deferred revenue management, payroll, another big one. Deferred letter management, customer management, huge one. That's CRM. Purchase requisitions, and fixed asset management. So this currently, in the first release of 2021 R2 at least, does not work with any of those modules. So you can't be using any of those modules if you want to use the new multiple base. That's the disclaimer, and that's, I would say, the bad news. But the good news is this is a huge piece of functionality to roll out. This is not easy. So the fact that we even have something across the other modules, looks like financials and distribution, that's major. And I would expect we'll see pretty quickly this advance into the other modules as well, and not get that error message if you try to enable it with those other modules. So huge right there. Glad to see this happening, and we'll see how long it takes to get it, especially in the projects area, is where I'm interested to see it. But especially if you think about a international situation, Acumatica might just be, especially for these larger companies. Acumatica has a handful or so of billion with a B dollar companies, and I think that in those situations it's just financials anyways, maybe some very light distribution. So that's probably where this feature is. Maybe they're the ones beating the drum on this, I'm not sure. Another thing to point out about it is, since you don't need separate tenants now to do multiple base currencies, if you're outside of the modules I listed, then you can share, not sure exactly everything, but I would assume you could share vendors, customers, items. That was a big challenge with the multiple tenant. You had to replicate the data across the tenants. So that's a big advantage of doing it now in one tenant. One of the advantages. I'd say there's many advantages. So great feature. I think that's, in my opinion, the big highlight of this release. Now you've got multiple base currencies across companies in one tenant. And the next two things we saw were actually both platform features. There's only a few platform features in this release because, again, they tend to be more heavily introduced in the R1 releases. But we still saw two things from Doug and Jessica. The first one was that now on a business event, you can have a business event create a CRM task. And even though it's called a CRM task, those tasks are available across the application, not just in the CRM area. You can attach tasks to most transactions from what I've noticed. So that's pretty powerful. Now, there was a way to do this previously, and I had it documented on a post in augforums.com in the forums, but it was really clunky. And you had to type in this manual weirdness into, I think it was into an import scenario. and then fire the import scenario, it was really messy. So now much cleaner, much easier. You can trigger an import scenario, you can trigger an email notification, you can trigger a mobile notification. You could also have a business event trigger a task to get created. And I really like that. I think of it as like a duct tape workflow. Of course, there's the new workflow engine in Acumatica, and we also saw that a little bit again. Couldn't tell if there was anything new in this release, but you have that nice visual workflow engine that's still part of the customization area. So you're kind of dipping your toes into development stuff there, but it's a low code, no code type of a solution. So you've definitely got that full blown workflow engine. But the ability to create tasks, to have certain events, or you save a record and it has a certain status, or a business event could even be triggered on a schedule. So you could have it run and look for information in a generic inquiry. If it finds it, go create a task, and the task could even be attached to a record, like maybe attached to a sales order. That task can then be assigned to someone, so it shows up on their task list, which tells them to do something. And I think of it like as a duct tape workflow engine. So I really like that, and that's now available in 2021 R2. The next thing we saw was the new Dax Schema Browser. So I would still probably put multiple base currencies as the top feature that I saw. But close second place, especially for a geeky person like me, is that Dax Schema Browser, because this has been long awaited. I actually created the feature request years ago. Can't remember exactly when it was, and it's been the highest voted on feature request for years now. And in 2021 R2, we finally have it. A Dax Schema Browser. And I really like how they did it. I'm planning to do a new feature video at the end of the month in my next monthly email update that goes out to everyone who has an account on augforums.com, covering it in more detail. But it looks like you can access it a few different ways. First of all, where I think it's most needed is when you're creating a generic inquiry. So we've had now for at least, I can't remember when this got introduced, a version or two ago. The ability to hit some table relationship buttons and more easily add relationships between tables. But now also when you're on a generic inquiry, as soon as you add that table now, on the Tables tab, it's a hyperlink. So you can click on the data access class and it takes you right into the Dax Schema Browser. And it's got a significant amount of detail in there. The primary keys, some foreign keys, a list of all the columns available in the DAC. There's all sorts of stuff going on in there. Not only can you access it from when you're creating a generic inquiry, but also on a regular screen. You can go up to, I think it's Tools, Dax Schema Browser, and it'll take you to the primary DAC on that screen. Or you can use my favorite Inspect Element DAC table now as a hyperlink. So you click on that, it takes you into the Dax Schema Browser. So they really did a good job. It's not just a text documentation of things. They really wove it into the application. And I don't know on this, but I wonder if, especially since it took so long for them to do this, I wonder if they came up with a way to auto-generate all that documentation, or if it's just something they're having to do by hand. Not sure, but it definitely looks well done. It's not just a kind of half attempt at putting something out there to satisfy the feature request. It seems well done from what I can see, but again, I'll be recording a video on that for the next monthly newsletter to go into more detail on exploring the Dax Schema Browser. That was my highlights from the Doug and Jessica demos. Then we went Doug and Jessica demos. Then we went back for about the probably last 10-15 minutes. That's when they did the Sneaky Big. They interviewed the CEO from Sneaky Big to talk about their cool studio there, and they showed a shot of the green screen. You can check out my blog post that has my Twitter notes from the whole event if you want to see a picture of that green screen. I thought it looked pretty interesting, including a shot of their software that they use to do the modeling of the virtual, I don't know what you call it, virtual world that you're broadcasting in. And then we ended probably about 50 minutes past the hour, so it's only about a 50-minute keynote with those demos still being the primary focus, but we're seeing more and more of the fluff get introduced that you could expect to see from a more mature Acumatica now in 2021. But after that, and the platform that was used was called Swapcard, swapcard.com. I believe the platform that was used for the last virtual launch in January for 2021 R1, I think it was Hopin, or that might have been the 2020 R2. Hopin.com. Either way, I definitely like this swap card better. I think it was a little easier for me to navigate. Although it might have had to do simply with the fact that everything seemed to be recorded. The keynote was recorded, and I think that was always recorded. But I think for the first time this time, the breakout sessions were recorded as well. So after the main keynote, you then had these different breakout sessions broken down by industry edition, and those were recorded. And what was really nice about that is it started whenever you jumped in. So if I clicked on it and then I clicked out and then I clicked back in, I could still start back at the beginning again. And I thought that was really nice, because I think what was happening before is some people take longer to transition out of the keynote and they'd be jumping into the middle of it. It just seemed to navigate better. So I like the event software that they used, and I like that everything was recorded. I also like that because the presenters who had already recorded their breakout sessions could then be interacting in the chat while you were watching their presentation. So I really like that format, especially having done a lot of live stuff with Brian Brown this year. We did a lot of those AUGforums.com live broadcasts. I think one thing I realized doing that is that really most people are watching the recording. And it's neat to have some chat interaction, but it's also hard to be interacting with chat while you're presenting something. So, the benefit of doing a truly live broadcast, I guess I'm not that enthusiastic about right now. I do like the idea, though, of having a recording, playing it live, and interacting in the chat. And that's exactly what Acumatica did here. So you're still getting people together, You're still getting some interaction, but, the presentation doesn't have to be live, at least not as far as I'm concerned. So I like that part. And I jumped into both the distribution and the construction breakout sessions because I was very interested to learn more about the new project inventory functionality. That functionality interests me a lot because I think Acumatica has a very strong position in being a hybrid solution across businesses that both do distribution and manufacturing, or construction and manufacturing. These businesses that in the past had to use different pieces of software for their different companies or their different arms of the business that have a different focus. Let's throw Field Ridge, all those different needs. You can now really have one platform. And so, I like it when I see Acumatica fill these gaps in these situations where you can't just look at it as the construction edition or the distribution edition. You really have to think across the industries. And so one gap that Acumatica had in that area was that prior to 2021 R2, you could not use a stock item and send it directly to a project. It had to go into a warehouse first, which was really clunky for people who wanted that stock item. Now, you could use a non-stock item and send it directly to a project, but then you couldn't receive a non-stock item into inventory because it's a non-stock item. But, so you might have these situations where sometimes you want the same part number to go to a project. You couldn't do both. You had to pick a path. Stock items go into inventory, and then you could do like a sales order or some extra steps to issue it out to a project, which was clunky. But now you can do something called a purchase order. I think it's a purchase order drop ship, which is basically receiving a purchase order directly to a project, even with a stock item, bypassing inventory completely and just hitting the project. So I really like that. That's a new feature in 2021 R2. I like seeing them fill the gaps in when you start to have these situations that cross the quote editions. And of course, the different editions of Acumatica are not different products. That's just a sales thing and how they get you to buy. In the end, you're just buying Acumatica and you turn on the features that you've paid for. So I really like that new project inventory functionality. I actually did 2 different videos because there's another feature that's sort of similar to that stock item thing I mentioned. I did 2 different videos on that because I was so excited about it yesterday. And you can find those on the YouTube channel at augforums.com/YouTube. Normally I only do those new feature videos in the monthly email newsletter. That's why I'll be doing that one on the Dax Schema Browser and the next one. But I broke my usual routine and did one yesterday on that project inventory functionality. As always, check out the release notes. There's a ton of stuff in there. I haven't digested it all by any means. These are just my highlights that I saw from the event yesterday and that I saw in the release notes as well. But I'm sure there's lots of other goodies in there, especially when you get those in these specific industry editions. This being an R2 release, there's a lot of heavy features that we saw across the various industry editions. All right, well, that's it for now. We'll catch you on the next episode of augforums.com Real Talk. Thanks for listening and take care.